My name is Harper, a 32-year-old software developer from Boston with what most people would call a successful life. That success meant nothing when my older brother Aaron slammed me into our parents' fridge and kneed me so hard my nose broke. I reached for my phone, blood streaming down my face, hands shaking. Mom ripped it away, snapping, "It is just a scratch." Dad glanced at the scene and muttered, "Drama king again." That night changed everything. Before I share how I finally broke free from years of family abuse, drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from, hit that like button, and subscribe to follow my journey from victim to survivor. I grew up in a middle-class suburban neighborhood outside Boston, in one of those picture-perfect houses with a manicured lawn and seasonal decorations that changed like clockwork. From the outside, we looked like the ideal American family. My father, Gregory, now 58, built his career as a business executive at a financial firm. He ruled our household with the same iron-fisted approach he used in the boardroom, valuing what he called toughness above all else. Showing emotion was weakness in his eyes, and weakness was unforgivable. My mother, Meredith, 56, dedicated her life to maintaining our perfect family image within the community. She was the PTA president, the neighborhood association coordinator, the church volunteer extraordinaire. The facade mattered more than what happened behind closed doors. Her favorite phrase, whenever tensions rose, was, "What would people think?" Those 5 words governed our lives more than any moral compass. Then there was Aaron, my brother, 4 years older, at 36. From our earliest days, he was the golden child. His aggressive tendencies were dismissed as natural male behavior, boys being boys, as my parents would say with proud smiles. His high school football trophies still occupy the most prominent display case in my parents' living room, untouched since his glory days as quarterback 18 years ago. I remember the first time Aaron broke something of mine, a model airplane I had spent weeks carefully assembling when I was 9. When I cried to my parents, my father said, "Toughen up, Harper. Your brother is just showing you how the real world works." My mother added, "He did not mean to break it, and you should not have left it where he could find it." This pattern repeated throughout our childhood. Aaron would hurt me, physically or emotionally, and my parents would either justify his actions or blame me for provoking him. While Aaron excelled in athletics, I found my strengths in academics and creative pursuits. I was the kid who built computers from spare parts and coded my first program at 12. But my achievements always seemed pale in comparison to Aaron making the winning touchdown or dating the head cheerleader. My parents attended every one of his games, but found excuses to miss my science fairs and programming competitions. After college, I poured myself into my career, partly driven by genuine passion for technology, but also desperately seeking the validation my family never gave me. I became the peacemaker, the one who would swallow insults at family gatherings, laugh off Aaron shoving me a little too hard, and never complain when my parents forgot my birthday but threw elaborate parties for Aaron. My efforts at work paid off professionally. 3 months ago, I received a promotion to lead developer at one of Boston's top tech firms, overseeing a team developing cutting-edge software applications. The company even featured me in their newsletter, which I foolishly showed my family, hoping finally for some recognition. That article triggered something dark in Aaron. His own career at our father-old firm had stalled. He had been passed over for promotion twice, with whispers about his volatile temper being the reason. Seeing my success seemed to intensify his lifelong resentment toward me. The signs were there in the weeks leading up to the incident. Aaron called late at night, drunk, telling me I had always been the lucky one despite being the family disappointment. He showed up uninvited at my apartment once, demanding I help him with connections at my company. When I explained I couldn't not simply get him hired, he kicked a hole in my wall before storming out. My parents, as always, minimized these incidents. "He is going through a rough patch," my mother said. "You know how sensitive he gets," my father added, as if Aaron was a toddler prone to tantrums rather than a grown man destroying property. I paid for the wall repair myself and did not press the issue, falling back into the familiar role of family peacekeeper. What I did not understand then, but see clearly now, was that I had been conditioned my entire life to accept this treatment as normal. I believed that family meant enduring abuse, making excuses for inexcusable behavior, and sacrificing my dignity on the altar of keeping the peace. I was so deeply enmeshed in this toxic system that I could not see how abnormal it truly was. The monthly family dinner at my parents' suburban home had been a tradition since Aaron and I moved out. Attendance was mandatory, regardless of work commitments or personal plans. Missing dinner was considered a betrayal of family values, and the guilt trips that followed were not worth the temporary freedom. So every last Sunday of the month, I would drive to my parents' house, stomach knotted with dread, to play my assigned role in our family performance. The Sunday of the incident seemed like any other family dinner at first. I arrived exactly at 5, bearing a bottle of my father's favorite scotch as a peace offering, knowing Aaron would likely be in one of his moods. My mother greeted me with her usual perfunctory hug, immediately checking over my shoulder to see if I had brought a date. "Still no special someone?" she asked, not bothering to hide her disappointment. I had learned long ago not to share my dating life with my family. Their disapproval of anyone I brought home was inevitable. The house smelled of pot roast and tension. My father sat in his recliner, watching a football game, barely acknowledging my arrival with a grunt. My mother bustled around the kitchen, refusing my offers to help. "You will just get in the way," she said, though I had worked as a line cook through college and was a competent chef. This was part of the script. My help was unwanted, but my absence from the kitchen would be criticized later. Aaron arrived 45 minutes late, reeking of alcohol though it was barely 6 in the evening. No one commented on his tardiness or his condition. Had I arrived 5 minutes late, or had a single beer before dinner, there would have been snide remarks throughout the meal about responsibility and respect. "Look who decided to grace us with his presence," Aaron said when he spotted me setting the table, a task my mother had finally allowed me. "The big-shot tech genius." "Hey, Aaron," I replied, keeping my tone neutral, already walking the tightrope of managing his mood. "Good to see you." "Is it?" he slurred slightly, dropping into a chair and immediately reaching for the bottle I had brought. He poured himself a generous glass of scotch without asking. My father, who normally guarded his good liquor jealously, said nothing. Dinner began with my mother prattle about neighborhood gossip, punctuated by my father's occasional comments about the stock market. I kept the conversation light, asking about my mother garden and my father golf game. Then my mother, in what I now recognize as a deliberate provocation, asked about my work. "Harper team is expanding internationally," she announced, as though reading from the company newsletter she had previously shown little interest in. "They are opening offices in London and Tokyo. Quite impressive." Aaron snorted into his third scotch. "What is impressive about it? He sits at a desk all day playing with computers. Not exactly curing cancer, is he?" "The software we are developing has applications in medical research," I explained, immediately regretting taking the bait. "One of our projects might actually help oncologists identify treatment patterns." "Listen to him," Aaron laughed, turning to our father. "Always has to one-up everyone. So now he is saving cancer patients." My father chuckled. "Do not get too big for your britches, Harper. Pride comes before a fall." The comment stung, as it was meant to. Here I was, sharing legitimate accomplishments, and being cut down immediately. In that moment, something shifted inside me. Perhaps it was the culmination of years of this treatment, or maybe it was simply that I had finally built enough confidence through my professional success to recognize the injustice of it all. "Actually," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "I am proud of what my team has accomplished. We have worked incredibly hard, and the expansion represents years of dedication and innovation. It is okay to acknowledge success." A silence fell over the table. This was not in the script. I was supposed to absorb the belittlement, perhaps make a self-deprecating joke, and move on. Instead, I had stood up for myself, however mildly. My mother quickly jumped in with, "Who wants apple pie?" I made it fresh this morning, her standard tactic for smoothing over uncomfortable moments. The rest of dinner passed in strained conversation. Aaron grew increasingly sullen, drinking steadily throughout the meal. My father retreated into monosyllabic responses. My mother chatted nervously about everything and nothing. I felt a strange combination of anxiety and liberation, having broken the unspoken rule against self-advocacy. After dinner, as was tradition, my mother retreated to her sewing room, and my father to his den to watch more sports. I volunteered to clean up the kitchen, partly to have some time alone to decompress, partly because I knew if I did not, my mother would complain about having to do everything herself, despite refusing help earlier. I was at the sink, washing dishes, when I heard Aaron's heavy footsteps enter the kitchen. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, animal instinct, warning of danger. I kept washing, hoping he would grab another drink and leave. "You think you are better than me now, do not you?" His voice was low, dangerous. "I never said that, Aaron," I replied, not turning around, focusing on the plate in my hands. "We are just on different career paths." "Different career paths," he mimicked in a high, mocking voice. "Listen to yourself, so superior. Always were mom and dad, perfect little genius boy. The special one." The irony of his statement was almost laughable. He had been the favored child our entire lives, but in his mind, any attention or success I received was a direct theft from what should have been his. "That is not true," I said, finally turning to face him. "You know that is not true." He was closer than I expected, his face flushed with alcohol and rage. "Do not tell me what I know," he spat. "Aaron, you are drunk. Let us talk tomorrow when you have sobered up." I tried to move past him, to exit the increasingly volatile situation. That is when it happened. As I attempted to step around him, Aaron grabbed my shoulders and slammed me backward with shocking force. My back crashed into the refrigerator, magnets and family photos scattering across the floor. Before I could recover, his knee drove upward into my face with a sickening crunch. The pain was immediate and blinding. I felt the distinct sensation of cartilage and bone giving way, followed by warm blood gushing down my face. My vision swam, black spots dancing at the edges as I slid down to the kitchen floor, clutching my shattered nose. In that moment of physical shock, what struck me most was not the pain, but the realization that my brother, my own flesh and blood, had deliberately caused me serious harm and felt justified in doing so. This was not an accident or a shove that went too far. This was calculated violence meant to hurt and dominate. Through the haze of pain, I fumbled for my phone in my pocket. Blood dripped onto the screen as I tried to focus enough to dial 911. This had crossed a line. This was assault. This required outside intervention. My fingers were slippery with blood as I struggled to unlock my phone. The kitchen tiles felt cold beneath me, a strange contrast to the hot throbbing pain radiating from my face. I managed to get the emergency screen up when I heard my mother's sharp intake of breath from the doorway. "What on earth is going on here?" she demanded, taking in the scene, my bloodied face, Aaron standing over me with clenched fists. For a brief, hopeful moment, I thought she would help me, call an ambulance, act like any normal parent whose child was injured and bleeding. Instead, she rushed forward and snatched the phone from my hands. "What do you think you are doing?" she hissed, clutching my phone to her chest. "My nose." I gasped through the blood. "I need to go to the hospital." She glanced at Aaron, who had backed up against the counter, his initial rage giving way to something that looked almost like satisfaction. Then she looked back at me dismissively. "It is just a scratch," she snapped, though blood was now soaking the front of my shirt. "Stop being so dramatic." My father's heavy footsteps approached, drawn by the commotion. He appeared in the doorway, took in the scene, and sighed deeply, as though we had interrupted his evening with some trivial annoyance. "What is all this noise about?" he asked, not moving to help me up from the floor. "Harper is overreacting as usual," my mother explained, still holding my phone out of reach. "He and Aaron had a little disagreement." "A little disagreement?" I echoed incredulously, my voice nasal and distorted from my broken nose. "He broke my nose." My father looked at me, blood streaming down my face, and shook his head. "Drama king again," he muttered, turning to Aaron. "Help your brother clean himself up. Your mother just mopped this floor yesterday." That was it. My brother had assaulted me seriously enough to break bones, and my father was concerned about the kitchen floor. Aaron made no move to help me, and my parents seemed to expect none from him. The golden child was beyond reproach, even for violence. With as much dignity as I could muster, I pulled myself up using the refrigerator door for support. The room spun momentarily, and I had to close my eyes against a wave of nausea. When I opened them, my family was watching me with expressions ranging from my mother impatience to my father indifference to Aaron's smirking satisfaction. "I need my phone," I said as steadily as possible. "You are not calling the police on your brother," my mother replied firmly. We handle family matters within the family. Those words, which I had heard countless times throughout my life, suddenly took on their true, sinister meaning. Handling matters within the family did not mean protecting each other. It meant protecting the abusers and silencing the abused. It meant preserving the precious family image at the cost of actual family members' well-being. "Fine," I said, not having the strength to argue. "I am going home." "You are in no condition to drive," my father said, finally showing a flicker of concern, though I suspected it was more about potential liability than my welfare. "I will call a rideshare," I replied, reaching again for my phone. My mother reluctantly handed it back, warning, "Do not do anything foolish, Harper. Every family has its disagreements." Disagreements. As if what had happened was a difference of opinion about politics or sports, not a violent assault. As I stumbled out to the front porch to wait for my ride, I heard my parents talking to Aaron in low, soothing tones. They were comforting him, the perpetrator, while I sat alone, injured and in shock. The rideshare driver took one look at me and asked if I needed to go to the hospital. I told him no, just home. I could not deal with more people, more questions. I needed to be alone to process what had happened. Not just the physical attack, but the complete betrayal that followed. That night was the longest of my life. I could not lie down because blood would pool in my throat, making me choke. I sat upright in my bathroom, periodically applying ice wrapped in towels to my swollen face, watching as my features became increasingly unrecognizable in the mirror. The physical pain was intense, but it paled in comparison to the emotional wound that had been torn open. As the hours crawled by, memories flooded back, illuminated now by the harsh light of my family true nature. I remembered being 6 years old, Aaron pushing me off the backyard playset and breaking my arm. My parents told the doctor I had fallen while playing too roughly. I remembered being 12, Aaron locking me in the shed for hours on a hot summer day as punishment for using his baseball glove. When I finally got out, dehydrated and terrified, my mother scolded me for making such a fuss and worrying everyone. I remembered countless family holidays where Aaron insults were laughed off as just his sense of humor, and my reactions condemned as too sensitive. I recalled my high school graduation, where my parents spent most of the ceremony talking about how Aaron had graduated with sports scholarships. Despite the fact that I was graduating with academic honors and a full scholarship to MIT, each memory clicked into place like puzzle pieces, forming a picture I had been too close to see clearly. This was not a normal family dynamic with occasional conflicts. This was a pattern of abuse, neglect, and scapegoating that had shaped my entire existence. I had been cast in the role of family punching bag from childhood, taught to accept mistreatment as love, and to view standing up for myself as betrayal. The most painful realization came as dawn broke over my apartment building. I had spent my entire life trying to earn the love and approval of people who were fundamentally incapable of giving it. No achievement would ever be enough. No sacrifice would ever earn their protection. Because the problem wasn't not what I did or did not do. The problem was that they had decided, long ago, that my only value was as the family receptacle for blame and negative emotion. For 32 years, I had been loyal to a family that had never been loyal to me. I had protected people who not only failed to protect me, but actively facilitated my abuse. I had maintained relationships that brought me nothing but pain, out of some misguided sense of obligation and the desperate hope that someday, if I just tried hard enough, they would love me the way I needed to be loved. As the first rays of sunlight fell across my bloodied bathroom floor, I made a decision that would change the course of my life. Family or not, I could no longer allow these people to hurt me. Self-preservation was not selfishness, it was sanity. And for the first time in my life, I chose myself. By morning, the swelling had worsened to the point where my left eye was completely shut. The pain had settled into a persistent, deep throb that over-the-counter medications barely touched. I called in sick to work, speaking briefly to my concerned assistant without going into details. Then, steeling myself against both the physical pain and the emotional hurdles, I drove myself to the emergency room. The waiting room was mercifully quiet for a Monday morning. The triage nurse took one look at me and expedited my case. "What happened to your face?" she asked, her tone professional, but gentle. I was attacked, I said simply, the first time I had acknowledged the truth aloud. Not an accident, not a disagreement, not a scuffle. An attack. The nurse, Samantha, according to her name tag, guided me to an examination room. Her questions were direct, but compassionate, asking about the timing of the injury, the force involved, whether I had lost consciousness. Then she asked the question I had been dreading. "Who attacked you, Mr. Williams?" I hesitated, decades of family conditioning screaming at me to protect the secret, to maintain the facade. "My brother," I finally admitted, my voice barely audible. Samantha nodded, making a note in my chart. There was no judgment in her expression, only professional concern. "Is this the first time your brother has physically harmed you?" And just like that, the dam broke. I told her about Aaron's lifetime of aggression, my parents' enabling behavior, the pattern of abuse disguised as normal sibling rivalry. Samantha listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes, her face showing appropriate concern but never the pity I had feared. When I finished, she placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, the first compassionate human touch I had received since the attack. "Mr. Williams, what you have experienced is domestic violence. It is not less serious because the perpetrator is your brother rather than a partner. We take this very seriously, and there are resources available to help you." "I am not a domestic violence victim," I protested weakly, the words sounding hollow even to my own ears. "That is not. That is for women with abusive husbands?" Samantha finished for me. "That is a common misconception. Domestic violence affects people of all genders, ages, and relationships. What matters is that someone who should have loved and protected you has deliberately harmed you, and others who should have intervened have enabled that harm." She provided me with several pamphlets on domestic violence resources, crisis counseling, and legal aid. "You do not have to make any decisions right now," she assured me, "but I want you to have this information when you are ready." The examination continued with X-rays, confirming what I already knew. My nose was broken in 2 places, requiring surgical intervention to properly set the bones. The doctor, a middle-aged man named Dr. Reynolds, examined the images with a frown. "This is a significant injury," he noted. "The force required to cause this kind of break is substantial. You are fortunate there isn't not more extensive damage to the surrounding orbital bones." As Dr. Reynolds continued his examination, he asked pointed questions about my home life, my relationship with my family, whether I felt safe returning to my apartment. His questions were not just medical but holistic, addressing the circumstances that had led to my injury as well as the injury itself. "This kind of trauma," he explained, gesturing to my X-rays, "often has psychological impacts as well as physical ones. I am going to refer you to a trauma specialist who can help you process this experience." I was scheduled for surgery the following day and sent home with prescription pain medication, care instructions, and a follow-up appointment. But more importantly, I left with a new perspective. Medical professionals, strangers who had no reason to lie to me, had validated that what happened to me was serious, wrong, and not my fault. They had called it what it was, abuse, without hesitation or qualification. Back at my apartment, with the physical aspects of my care temporarily addressed, I found myself at a loss. My phone showed 17 missed calls and 23 text messages from my mother, ranging from concerned inquiries about my whereabouts to angry accusations that I was worrying her deliberately. There were no messages from my father or Aaron. I set the phone aside without responding and opened my laptop. If I was going to reclaim control of my life, I needed information, a plan, and support. I began researching family abuse patterns, particularly adult sibling abuse, a topic I had never considered relevant to my life before. What I found was both disturbing and validating. The patterns described in academic and support literature matched my experiences with eerie precision. The golden child and scapegoat dynamic, the enabling parents, the gaslighting and minimizing of serious harm, the enforced family secrecy, all these were recognized. Documented patterns in abusive family systems, not the normal family disagreements my parents had always claimed. I discovered online forums for adult survivors of family abuse, where people shared stories with elements so similar to mine that it was startling. People who had been conditioned to accept mistreatment, who had been told their valid reactions were overreactions, who had been trained from childhood to prioritize their abuser's comfort over their own safety. People who had broken free and built new lives. After hours of research, I reached out to an old friend, Justin, who had distanced himself from me years earlier after witnessing my family dynamics at a barbecue. He had told me then that the way my family treated me was not normal or healthy, words I had dismissed as an overreaction to a bad day. I now realized he had seen clearly what I had been too enmeshed to recognize. Justin responded to my message within hours, expressing both sadness about my injury and relief that I was finally seeing my family situation clearly. He offered practical help, emotional support, and connections to resources he had used in addressing his own family trauma. Over the next week, as I recovered from surgery, I developed a comprehensive escape plan. I found a new apartment in a secure building across town, one with controlled access and security cameras. I consulted with an attorney about restraining orders, learning what evidence I would need if I chose to pursue legal protection. I scheduled appointments with a trauma therapist recommended by the hospital. I secured my financial independence, opening new accounts at a different bank, ensuring my family had no access to my resources. I documented the assault and previous incidents as thoroughly as possible, taking photographs of my injuries at different stages of healing, collecting medical records, and writing detailed accounts of past abuses while they were fresh in my memory. Each step brought both anxiety and relief. The conditioning to protect my family, to keep secrets, to minimize harm done to me, ran deep. Every action I took to protect myself triggered waves of guilt and doubt. Was I overreacting? Was I betraying people who, despite everything, I still loved? Was I destroying my family over one mistake? The rational part of me knew these thoughts were the result of lifelong programming, the voice of my parents in my head rather than my own authentic voice. But knowledge did not make the feelings any less real or painful. I reminded myself daily that protecting myself was not an act of aggression against my family. It was simply a refusal to continue being their victim. The turning point came during my second therapy session with Dr. Martinez, a specialist in family trauma. After listening to me express guilt over potentially hurting my family by withdrawing from them, she asked a simple question that fundamentally shifted my perspective. "Harper," she said gently, "when your brother broke your nose and your parents denied you medical care, were they concerned about hurting you?" The answer was so obviously no that I could not even attempt to rationalize it away. In that moment, the last piece clicked into place. I had been living by rules of consideration and care that had never been applied to me. I had been the only one concerned with everyone's well-being in a family where no one was concerned with mine. With that realization, my resolve solidified. I would continue to act with integrity, but I would no longer sacrifice my safety and well-being on the altar of family harmony. The time had come to set boundaries that actually protected me, even if that meant fundamentally changing, or even ending, relationships that had defined my entire life. A week after the assault, with my escape plan in place and my new apartment secured, I returned to my parents' house to retrieve essential personal belongings I had stored there over the years. I planned my visit strategically, arriving at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday when Aaron would normally be at work, minimizing the chance of another confrontation. I had not responded to any of my family messages, a silence that was itself unprecedented in our family dynamic, where ignoring my mother calls was treated as a capital offense. What I had not anticipated was finding not just my parents but Aaron as well, all seated in the living room as though awaiting my arrival. My mother rushed forward as I entered, arms outstretched for a hug I deliberately sidestepped. "Harper, darling, we have been so worried," she exclaimed, her voice pitched to a theatrical concern that did not reach her eyes. "Why haven't not you returned our calls? And what happened to your face?" The question was so absurd, so divorced from reality, that for a moment I wondered if I had imagined the entire incident. The gaslighting was so automatic, so seamless, that it almost worked despite the physical evidence of 2 black eyes and bandages covering my surgically repaired nose. "What happened to my face?" I repeated slowly. "Aaron broke my nose last week." You were there, Mom. You took my phone when I tried to call for help. My mother waved a dismissive hand, the familiar gesture of erasing inconvenient truths. There was a little scuffle. Yes, but you are exaggerating as usual. If you had really been hurt, we would have taken you to the doctor ourselves. My father, who had not risen from his chair, finally spoke. Harper, your mother and I think it is time we all moved past this nonsense. Family disagreements happen, but dwelling on them only makes things worse. Disagreements, I echoed, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. Is that what we are calling aggravated assault now? A disagreement? Aaron, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, stood up and approached me. I tensed, ready to defend myself, but he stopped a few feet away, his posture deliberately non-threatening. Look, I am sorry things got out of hand, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. I had too much to drink, and you know how I get when I am stressed. I did not mean to hurt you that badly. The apology, if it could even be called that, was textbook minimization. He was sorry things got out of hand, not that he had deliberately attacked me. He blamed alcohol and stress, not his own choices. He claimed he had not intended the severity of the outcome, as though that absolved him of responsibility for the action itself. And most tellingly, he expected this half-hearted acknowledgement to be sufficient, because it always had been before. I did not come here to listen to excuses, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I came to get my things. I am moving. The announcement landed like a bomb in the carefully controlled family environment. My mother's face cycled through shock, hurt, and anger before settling on calculated concern. Moving? But why? Your apartment is so convenient to work, and you always said how much you loved it there. I am not just changing apartments, Mom. I am changing my relationship with this family. I need space and time to heal, not just physically but emotionally. My father stood now, his face darkening with the anger he reserved for when his authority was challenged. That is ridiculous. You cannot cut off your family because of one incident. One incident? I laughed, though there was no humor in it. This has been my entire life. Aaron has been hurting me since we were children, and you two have been enabling it, excusing it, and often blaming me for it. Last week was just the first time it was severe enough that I could not deny what was happening anymore. You always were oversensitive, my mother said, her tone shifting to one of condescension. We raised you both the same way, but you always took everything so personally. You did not raise us the same way, I countered, decades of unspoken truth finally finding voice. Aaron was allowed to do anything without consequences. I was blamed for everything, including the things he did to me. Aaron stepped closer, his face flushing with the familiar pre-violence anger. You think you had it so bad? Try living in the shadow of the perfect genius brother who never had to work for anything. Everything always came easy to you. I refused to be baited into the old argument, the familiar script designed to make me defensive, to pull me back into the family dynamic where I would try to prove my worth or defend myself against absurd accusations. Instead, I took out my phone. I am recording this conversation, I said calmly. I have documented my injuries, have medical records confirming the assault, and have begun building a case should I need to pursue legal action or a restraining order. The effect was immediate. My father's face went pale, my mother gasped, and Aaron stepped back as though I had physically pushed him. The idea that our family business might become public, that the carefully maintained facade might crack, was more threatening to them than any physical violence. You would not dare, my mother whispered. We are your family. Family does not break bones and refuse medical care, I replied. Family does not blame victims for the abuse they suffer. What we have is not family. It is a toxic system that I have participated in for far too long. So what now? My father demanded. You will drag our private matters through the courts? Bring shame on all of us? Is that your idea of solving problems? I do not want to pursue legal action, I said truthfully. What I want is to establish clear boundaries. Aaron, if you ever touch me again, I will press charges immediately, without hesitation. Mom and Dad, I am taking a break from family gatherings and regular contact while I work with a therapist to process 30 years of dysfunction. The silence that followed was deafening. For perhaps the first time in our family history, I had stated a boundary clearly and without apology. I had prioritized my own well-being over the family image and everyone else's comfort. I had broken the cardinal rule of our household: never acknowledge the reality behind the facade. "You cannot be serious," my mother finally said, tears welling in her eyes, the familiar manipulation that had worked so effectively in the past. "After everything we have done for you, you would abandon us like this? What will people think?" "I do not care what people think anymore," I replied, feeling a weight lift as I said the words. "I care about building a life where I am safe, respected, and valued. If you want to be part of that life, eventually, things will have to change fundamentally." My father, ever the pragmatist, seemed to realize that his usual tactics of intimidation and dismissal were not working. "What exactly do you want from us?" he asked, his tone suggesting he was humoring me rather than taking me seriously. "Right now, I want space. In the future, if we are to have any relationship, I need acknowledgement of the abuse that has occurred, a genuine commitment to change, and respect for the boundaries I set. That includes no dropping by unannounced, no guilt trips about family obligations, and absolutely no tolerance for any form of aggression or violence." Aaron, who had been suspiciously quiet, suddenly laughed. "This is classic Harper, always so dramatic. You will be back in a month when you realize you have no one else." His words were designed to hit a vulnerable spot, to remind me of the isolation that had been deliberately cultivated throughout my life, the subtle ways my parents had discouraged deep friendships and romantic relationships that might have given me perspective on our family dysfunction. But instead of landing as intended, his comment only reinforced my resolve. "I would rather be alone than surrounded by people who hurt me," I said simply. "But as it happens, I am not alone. There are people in my life who actually care about my well-being, who do not see me as an emotional punching bag or an inconvenience." I moved toward the stairs, intending to retrieve my belongings from my old bedroom. My mother stepped in front of me, blocking my path. "If you leave like this," she said, her voice trembling with emotion that seemed genuinely felt, "if misplaced, you will break my heart." For a moment, the old guilt surfaced. The programming to prioritize everyone's feelings above my own physical and emotional safety flickered to life. But I had come too far to turn back now. "I am sorry you feel that way," I said gently, "but my heart has been breaking for years, and none of you seemed concerned about that. I need to take care of myself now." I sidestepped her and went upstairs, gathering the family photos, childhood mementos, and important documents I had stored there. When I came back down, my family was still in the living room, my father talking in low tones to Aaron, my mother dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. They fell silent as I entered. "This is not forever," I said, softening slightly at their evident distress, genuine or performed. "But things cannot go back to the way they were. I deserve better than what this family has given me, and I am finally ready to believe that." As I walked out the door, carrying the physical artifacts of my past and leaving behind the emotional weight of decades of abuse, I felt simultaneously terrified and liberated. The familiar was comfortable even when painful. The unknown future stretched before me, full of both possibility and uncertainty. But for the first time in my life, I was the author of my own story, not a character in someone else's script, and that made all the difference. The first night in my new apartment was simultaneously liberating and terrifying. The space was secure, with key fob entry to the building and solid deadbolts on my door. I had chosen a third-floor unit, partly for the view but mostly because it felt safer than being on the ground level. Yet despite these physical security measures, I found myself jumping at every sound, constantly checking that the door was locked, unable to fully relax in my own home. This, my therapist later explained, was a normal trauma response. My body had learned that home was not safe, that the people who should protect me were the ones who posed the greatest threat. Unlearning that lesson would take time and conscious effort. The initial weeks were a roller coaster of emotion. Some days I felt empowered, proud of myself for finally establishing boundaries, excited about building a life based on my own values rather than my family expectations. Other days, I was swamped with guilt and doubt, questioning whether I had overreacted, whether I had destroyed my family relationships unnecessarily. The conditioning of a lifetime did not disappear overnight, no matter how clear the intellectual understanding of the situation might be. My first therapy session with Dr. Martinez after the confrontation was particularly difficult. "What you are experiencing is called cognitive dissonance," she explained when I described my conflicting emotions. "Your intellectual understanding of the situation, that your family relationships were abusive and unhealthy, is at odds with the emotional programming you received throughout your life, that family must be preserved at all costs, and that their treatment of you was normal." She guided me through exercises to identify and challenge the internalized messages that were causing me distress, the deeply rooted beliefs that I was responsible for my family happiness, that setting boundaries was selfish, that being alone was the worst possible outcome. "These beliefs served a purpose during your childhood," she explained. "They helped you survive in an environment where you had little power or control. But they are not serving you now, and you can choose to replace them with beliefs that support your health and growth." My physical recovery progressed steadily. The surgical repair of my nose was successful, though the doctor warned that there might always be a slight asymmetry, a permanent reminder of the moment that had finally pushed me to break free from the cycle of abuse. The bruising faded from purple to green to yellow before finally disappearing. The external signs of trauma healed more quickly than the internal ones. Support came from unexpected sources. My boss, Jonathan, who had seen the evidence of the assault when I returned to work, was unexpectedly understanding. Rather than the skepticism or uncomfortable silence I had anticipated, he shared that he had witnessed domestic violence in his own family growing up and connected me with the company Employee Assistance Program for additional support resources. Several coworkers, with whom I had previously maintained cordial but distant relationships, stepped up with practical help moving into my new place or simply companionable presence when being alone felt overwhelming. Old friends like Justin, who had witnessed glimpses of my family dysfunction over the years, reached out with validation and support. Meanwhile, my family launched a full-scale campaign to bring me back into the fold. My mother's barrage of tactics was predictable, but still difficult to withstand. Daily voicemails ranged from tearful pleading, "How could you do this to me? I gave you everything," to angry accusations, "You have always been selfish, only thinking of yourself," to manipulative health concerns, "My blood pressure is through the roof because of this stress you have created." My father's approach was more direct and authoritarian. His emails were stern lectures about family responsibility, thinly veiled threats about being cut out of the will, and occasional attempts at guilt through references to my mother's deteriorating state. He never once acknowledged the assault or his role in enabling decades of abuse. Aaron alternated between hostile messages accusing me of destroying the family and occasional apologetic texts that still managed to minimize his actions and shift partial blame to me. "I am sorry I hit you, but you know how to push my buttons," was as close to a genuine apology as he could manage. The most difficult aspect was the recruitment of extended family. Aunts, uncles, and cousins I barely spoke with suddenly reached out, having heard a carefully crafted version of events that painted me as mentally unstable, overreacting to a minor sibling squabble. Most took my parents' side without question, some even suggesting I needed psychiatric help for breaking off family contact. A few, however, shared that they had long observed the dysfunctional dynamics, but had not felt it was their place to intervene. Through it all, I maintained my boundaries with a firmness that surprised even me. I created rules for communication, informing my family that I would not respond to guilt trips, accusations, or manipulation. I would only engage with messages that respected my boundaries and acknowledged the reality of what had happened. This resulted in long periods of silence, as such messages were rare. The holidays, traditionally a time of forced family togetherness regardless of underlying tensions, presented a particular challenge. Thanksgiving approached with increasing pressure to return to the fold, to pretend nothing had changed, to maintain the facade of family harmony. Instead, I accepted an invitation from Jonathan and his wife for a strays Thanksgiving with others who, for various reasons, were not spending the holiday with biological family. The experience was revelatory. There was no walking on eggshells, no bracing for the next backhanded comment or potential explosion. People asked questions and actually listened to the answers. Disagreements occurred, but were handled with respect rather than contempt or manipulation. By the end of the evening, I had a new understanding of what healthy social connections could feel like, a standard against which the dysfunction of my family gatherings stood in stark contrast. As I continued healing, I rediscovered parts of myself that had been suppressed to avoid triggering my family disapproval. I resumed playing guitar, a passion I had abandoned after being told repeatedly by my father that the noise was annoying and my talent mediocre at best. I reconnected with my interest in astronomy, joining a local club that met monthly for stargazing outings, something my family had dismissed as a waste of time that took me away from more productive pursuits. 3 months after the confrontation, I experienced another significant milestone in my recovery. A new team member at work was being subtly bullied by one of the senior developers, with snide comments about his code and exclusion from team social events. In the past, I would have observed this silently, perhaps offering private support but never risking conflict by addressing it directly. Instead, I spoke up in a team meeting, calmly but firmly pointing out the pattern and its impact on team dynamics. The senior developer was initially defensive, but when other team members backed me up, acknowledging that they too had noticed the behavior, he reluctantly apologized. The incident was small in the grand scheme of things, but it represented an enormous shift in my willingness to stand up against mistreatment, not just for myself but for others as well. That evening, I shared the experience with Marcus, another member of my support group for adult survivors of family abuse. We had developed a friendship outside the group, bonding over similar experiences and shared interests. "It is like the ripple effect," he observed. "When you learn to value yourself enough to reject abuse, you naturally begin to protect others too. Your normal meter gets recalibrated." The phrase, "normal meter," struck a chord. My entire life, I had been operating with a miscalibrated normal meter, one that had been deliberately tampered with by my family to normalize mistreatment and invalidate my natural responses to abuse. Slowly, painfully, I was recalibrating that meter, learning to trust my own perceptions and honor my own needs. To mark 3 months of independence, I hosted a small gathering at my new apartment, something I would never have done before, always afraid of my home being invaded or judged by others. As I looked around at the mix of new and old friends sharing food, conversation, and laughter in my space, I realized I was building something I had never truly had before, a chosen family based on mutual respect and genuine care rather than obligation and control. There was still much healing to do, still days when doubts crept in or when a particular trigger would send me spiraling back into old patterns of thought. But those days grew less frequent as new patterns of self-respect and healthy boundaries strengthened. I was not merely surviving in the absence of abuse. I was beginning to thrive in an environment of my own creation, one built on authenticity, respect, and genuine connection. 6 months after I walked out of my parents' house, my phone rang with my mother's number. I had maintained minimal contact, responding only to messages that respected my boundaries, which had resulted in weeks of silence punctuated by brief, stilted exchanges. I almost did not answer, assuming it would be another attempt at guilt or manipulation. Something, perhaps intuition, perhaps simply hope, made me pick up. "Harper," my mother's voice was subdued, lacking its usual dramatic flair. "Your father had a heart attack this morning. He is stable, but the doctors are keeping him in for observation." The news hit me with unexpected force. Despite everything, these were still my parents, still people I had loved and sought approval from my entire life. The complex tangle of emotions, concern and anger, love and hurt, nearly overwhelmed me. "Which hospital?" I asked, already reaching for my keys. "Memorial." "Harper, Aaron is here too." The warning was clear but delivered without the usual pressure or manipulation. I took a deep breath, centering myself in the progress I had made. "I will come, but I need you to understand my conditions. I will not be in the same room as Aaron. This changes nothing about the boundaries I have set." There was a pause, and I braced for resistance, for emotional blackmail about family unity in a crisis. Instead, my mother simply said, "I understand. He will stay in the cafeteria while you visit." The hospital room was dim and quiet, except for the steady beep of monitoring equipment. My father looked smaller somehow, diminished by the hospital gown and the vulnerability of illness. He was awake, his eyes finding mine as I entered. "Harper," he said, his voice weaker than I had ever heard it. "You came." "Of course I came," I replied, taking a seat beside the bed but not reaching for his hand as I might have done automatically in the past. Boundaries remained important, even in crisis. We sat in uncomfortable silence for a few moments before my father spoke again. "The doctor says I need to reduce stress." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Apparently, decades of being a hard-charging business executive takes a toll." I nodded, not filling the silence with reassurances or platitudes. Another moment passed before he continued, his voice so low I had to lean forward to hear. "I have been thinking about what you said, about how I, failed to protect you." He looked away, toward the window. "I always thought being a good father meant raising tough kids who could handle themselves in the world. I did not want you to be soft. There is a difference between teaching resilience and enabling abuse," I said quietly. "Aaron hurt me, repeatedly and severely, and you taught me to accept it as normal." My mother, who had been unnaturally silent in the corner of the room, made a small sound of protest. "We never meant for anyone to get hurt," she said, her default defense. "Intent does not change impact," I replied, the phrase borrowed from Dr. Martinez but now fully integrated into my own understanding. "You may not have intended harm, but harm was done, repeatedly, over decades." My father closed his eyes briefly, either from fatigue or to avoid my gaze. "I cannot change the past," he finally said. "I am not even sure I fully understand everything you believe went wrong. But this," he gestured weakly at the hospital room, "makes a man think about what matters. And despite everything, you are my son, and that matters." It was not the full acknowledgement I had hoped for, not a complete recognition of the abuse or his role in it. But it was the first time my father had expressed anything approaching regret or a desire for reconciliation based on something other than maintaining appearances. It was a small opening, a hairline crack in the fortress of denial. "I am glad you are going to be okay," I said, meaning it despite everything. "And I hope this can be a turning point, not just for your physical health but for our relationship too. But that will require real changes, not just temporary ones during a crisis." I left the hospital without encountering Aaron, true to my mother's promise. The visit had been brief but significant, a first tentative step toward a potential new relationship with my parents, one built on honesty rather than pretense, on respect rather than control. Whether they would be willing or able to continue that journey remained to be seen. 2 weeks later, at Dr. Martinez's suggestion, I agreed to meet with Aaron at a neutral location, a quiet corner of a public park, with the additional safety measure of having my therapist present. Aaron arrived, looking uncharacteristically subdued, none of the domineering physical presence he typically projected. "Thank you for meeting me," he began, the formality strange between brothers. "I have been attending anger management classes and speaking with someone, a counselor." I nodded, but remained silent, giving him space to continue without the reassurance he clearly sought. "I have a problem with anger," he admitted, the words seemingly difficult for him, "and with alcohol. Neither of those excuses what I did to you, but I am working on both issues." "Why?" I asked simply. "Why now? After all these years?" Aaron looked genuinely surprised by the question. "Because I lost my brother," he said, as if it should have been obvious. "Because when you left, it was like a mirror shattered, and I could suddenly see what I had been doing all these years. For the first time, I considered that my departure might have disrupted the dysfunctional family system for everyone, not just for me. Without the designated scapegoat, the family dynamics had been forced to reorganize, bringing previously normalized behaviors into sharper, more uncomfortable focus. "I cannot promise to forget what happened," I said carefully, "and I cannot immediately trust that things have changed based on words alone. But I am willing to observe the changes you are making and reassess our relationship based on consistent actions over time." It was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was an opening, a possibility that had not existed before. Aaron nodded, accepting these terms without the defensive anger that would have been his reaction 6 months earlier. The weeks and months that followed brought gradual, Incremental shifts in my family relationships. My parents began attending family therapy. Initially, they claimed, to understand how to better communicate with me, but eventually acknowledging deeper issues in their marriage and parenting approaches. My father's diabetes diagnosis, a complication following his heart attack, further underscored the need for lifestyle changes, creating an opening for emotional and relational changes as well. Aaron continued with his anger management program and began addressing his alcohol use through a recovery program. There were setbacks, days when old patterns resurfaced, when my mother fell back on emotional manipulation, or my father retreated into authoritarian rigidity. But there were also genuine moments of connection, conversations where real listening occurred, small acknowledgments of past harms. Throughout this tentative family reconciliation, I maintained firm boundaries. I declined invitations to family gatherings that felt potentially volatile. I ended phone calls when they veered into toxic territory. I continued to live separately and build my independent life. These boundaries were no longer seen as acts of hostility, but recognized, however reluctantly, as necessary conditions for any continuing relationship. My own healing continued to deepen. With Dr. Martinez's guidance, I processed childhood experiences I had previously normalized or suppressed, recognizing the impact they had on my adult relationships and self-concept. I worked to identify and change learned behaviors that no longer served me: the hypervigilance, the tendency to minimize my own needs, the automatic assumption that conflict meant danger. The one-year anniversary of the assault and my subsequent departure from my family home became an opportunity for reflection. I had changed in ways I could never have anticipated. The nervous, people-pleasing man who had endured decades of mistreatment in the hope of eventually earning love and approval had been replaced by someone more grounded, more authentic, more willing to risk disapproval to maintain integrity. My career had flourished without the constant weight of family drama and criticism. I had been promoted again, now leading a department and mentoring younger developers. My social circle had expanded to include genuine friendships rather than the superficial connections I had previously maintained, too afraid of bringing anyone close enough to witness my family dysfunction. I had even begun speaking occasionally at the support group where I had found such validation in the early days of my journey, sharing my experience with others, still finding their way out of similar situations. The most important thing I learned, I told a newcomer to the group, is that standing up for yourself is not selfish or disloyal. It is necessary, not just for your own well-being, but often for the health of the entire family system. That insight had proven true in ways I could not have predicted. My parents, faced with the potential permanent loss of relationship with their son, had been motivated to examine their own patterns and seek help in changing them. Aaron, without his designated punching bag and with the reality of his behavior starkly illuminated, had been forced to confront his issues with anger and addiction. None of these changes would have occurred had I continued in my assigned role, absorbing abuse, to maintain the illusion of family harmony. My departure, while painful for everyone involved, had created the possibility of healthier relationships that would never have emerged from the toxic stasis we had maintained for decades. As I sat on my apartment balcony on the evening of that one-year anniversary, watching the sunset paint the city skyline in shades of gold and pink, I felt a deep sense of peace. The journey had not been easy, and it was far from complete. There would be more challenges ahead, more moments of having to reassert boundaries, more painful reckonings with the past. But I had found something I had never truly had before: freedom. Freedom from the constant anxiety of navigating a toxic environment. Freedom from the exhausting task of managing other people's emotions at the expense of my own well-being. Freedom to define family on my own terms. To create connections based on mutual respect rather than obligation and fear. For anyone watching who might be in a similar situation, wondering if they have the right to protect themselves from family harm, let me be clear: you do. Setting boundaries is not selfish. It is necessary. Removing yourself from abuse is not abandoning family. It is creating the possibility of healthier relationships for everyone involved. The journey is difficult, but the freedom on the other side is worth every painful step. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family? What helped you find the strength to prioritize your own well-being? Like and subscribe if this story resonated with you, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, even by family, especially by family. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, healing is not a linear journey, but it is always, always possible.